Hey guys, how's it going? News roundup time once again. First of all, we're going to go over the new details of the Man of Steel 2 pitch and how that was stalled. As usual, each day as it seems, there's just a little bit more information there. And then how the previous Warner Brothers regime had plans for a Crisis on Infinite Earths cinematic event that would have also apparently involved bringing Henry Cavill's Superman back into the fold. If you tuned into Friday's video as well, we covered the cancelled solo Batman movie with Michael Keaton and how it's also going to be a Batman Beyond movie. We've got some more updates on what that actually would have involved. Meanwhile, on the James Gunn side of things on Twitter, there's been some more Twitter stuff to do with Superman and also shutting down some more false scoops. And then what I'm very buzzing about, because I remember covering Joker in the pre-production days on this channel, some of you may remember those days if you've been subscribed long enough. We have got our first little teaser and look at Joker 2, and believe it or not, you know me, just from a picture, I have quite a few things to say. But let's start right at the beginning. So, we are revisiting The Hollywood Reporter. Now, these are the first guys to put out that whole story about the DC Universe, Wonder Woman 3, Patty Jenkins walking away, apparently even sending an email to Michael DeLuca and Pam Abdi, linking to the Wikipedia definition of character arc. Well, that was actually expanded upon in other reports, but you know the whole shtick there. Then Deadline expanded on all of this. We covered that Friday, but now we have some extra details from their Hollywood Reporter Heat Vision, which I guess is kind of like a little place where they expand on little tidbits here and there. And as you see here, they're just initially going over the past few days since their story release, saying, wow, what a week for DC. Just wow. Going on to recap about Patty Jenkins walking away, as we just went over, the whole Black Adam losing money, but then maybe not losing money, but still not really being that successful. But then they go on to say, we have just a few of our own notes to add, some additional details that we have unearthed. So, Man of Steel 2 has stalled out. It's Kal-El with kryptonite ankle bracelets at this point, not going anywhere. But it was on the move ahead of James Gunn and Peter Safran's arrival at DC, even though it's unclear how far that specific incarnation would have gotten. Sources tell us Stephen Knight, the creator of TV series Peaky Blinders and C, and writer of movies Spencer and Eastern Promises, penned a treatment for the project in the fall. Unfortunately, it didn't thrill Warner's executives who gave notes. There's that word again, and they're obviously referencing Patty Jenkins there. Before things could go on to the next level, which may or may not have included hiring another writer given Knight's very busy schedule, Gunn and Safran were hired and development promptly ended. So yeah, I know people are gonna be like, screw you, James Gunn and Peter Safran, why did you stall the development? Because if you remember a few weeks ago, when everything was coming out, Henry Cavill left The Witcher, it seemed that Man of Steel 2 was happening after Black Adam, after his appearance, in very early talks, nothing signed, nothing pen to paper, but as you can clearly see here, they were trying to pitch things. Apparently Michael DeLuca and Pam Abdi, who were the current people handling things over at DC before James Gunn and Peter Safran came in, weren't interested in the first writer pitch from Man of Steel producer Charles Roven. But then also Stephen Knight, there was a pitch there and they're like, yeah, not so much with that as well. So clearly things were very, very early on the tracks with Man of Steel 2. Now, I wouldn't take anything too negative out of that just yet, especially with what we're about to get into with what James Gunn has said about Superman over on Twitter, because maybe they are, as we know, in the midst of figuring out their 8 to 10 year plan. They've got lots dotted down on their journal, I'm sure, but with whatever was being pitched thus far, even before they came in, was being shut down, and, you know, they gave notes, and then even when they did come in with the Stephen Knight pitch, I think the reason why the latest one kind of got shot down is because they're still figuring it out, and that doesn't mean that Henry Cavill, just like how Gal Gadot, Patty Jenkins is kind of bye-bye right now, but it looks like all arrows are pointing towards her staying on in the new DCU, at least as far as we can tell right now. The same thing could be happening with Henry Cavill. It's just right now, I guess it's on a little bit of a stall. They need to figure things out, how they would introduce and involve Superman in the new DCU plans, and then they will revisit just how future pitches could incorporate that in whatever James Gunn and Peter Safran have got cooking up. But I do want to acknowledge the other side. Maybe they are recasting Superman and they want a whole new Superman, which is why the Stephen Knight pitch, who also penned a treatment for the Man of Steel 2 movie. And we learned that Warner Brothers executives were not thrilled. And before it could go any further, that's when James Gunn and Peter Safran came in, and then it wasn't allowed to go any further. But for now, I'm choosing to believe in the whole soft reboot idea. They are keeping some characters like Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman. It might be, as I said with that comparison in my previous video, the Daredevil Born Again analogy, where sure, there's going to be a lot of changes, soft reboot doesn't mean minimal changes. I think sometimes people get confused between the hard reboot, which is obviously an easy one to figure out, complete cinematic reset, like going back to Man of Steel, like whole new universe, right? But a soft reboot, you can have major changes, but then some that are just really subtle. So you still have the same actor, Daredevil Born Again, Netflix over to the MCU, but there are still subtle changes in that character's demeanor, maybe a bit of the take, things like that. Same with Vincent D'Onofrio's Wilson Fisk. Clearly some soft reboot changes there, but he's still got the demeanor of Fisk in a way. I think it's going that way with not only Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman, but also hopefully Henry Cavill's Superman. I feel a lot more sure about Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman carrying on in the DCU right now compared to that of Henry Cavill's Superman. But I am choosing to remain optimistic here for the Henry Cavill side of things. I think the delay and why the development promptly ended for that Man of Steel 2 story and movie they were pitching is maybe down to like, well, we need to still figure out how Henry's going to be in. Are we doing like a Man of Steel 2 sequel, or is it going to kind of be more of a reboot with Henry Cavill's Superman, so we don't want to call it Man of Steel 2? There could be all kinds of reasons, but of course it could be that they don't want him and they actually want somebody completely new. But don't subscribe to either idea just yet. And why? Because ultimately, we actually just don't know. But speaking of Superman, this one's an interesting one, because the details we're about to get into next talks about how under Hamada and under the old Warner Brothers regime before they merged, as we know, all of those plans have completely changed. This is when the Flash movie was introducing Keaton, and it still is, but he was going to echo out into Batgirl. That got canned. He was going to have a solo Batman movie. That's now been canned. So clearly the plans have changed, but they were going to reintroduce Superman amongst this massive event, one of which we all know, and that is Crisis on Infinite Earths. But a lot of fans are feeling like is this really true though? Because Hamada really didn't seem to want to bring Henry Cavill's Superman back. And funnily enough, when Hamada left the office, in comes Henry Cavill in Black Adam, if you know what I mean. So this goes on to say, just staying on topic of the dream to bring back Henry Cavill, Dwayne Johnson wasn't the only one who had that idea. Former head of DC Films Walter Hamada was also working on a long-range plan to return Superman and Cavill to the DC cinematic fold. Sources tell us that cameos in forthcoming DC movies of next year would have breadcrumbed into a giant tentpole movie inspired by the now classic Crisis on Infinite Earths comic of the 1980s. That comic miniseries featured multiple timelines and heroes from other dimensional Earths, and just as the Flash movie was returning Michael Keaton and Ben Affleck in their Batman incarnations, this new movie project would have returned Cavill as Supes. Johnson, however, had his own plans and muscled his own Cavill return, which the latter is true. He was just like, well, whatever you're thinking there, but I'm bringing my boy Henry back now in this movie. But apparently these sources are telling the Hollywood Reporter that he was going to eventually come back in Crisis on Infinite Earths. And one thing I will say is, again, we can't count on every single source, even if it is a major trade like the Hollywood Reporter, Deadline, or whoever, being true. But just entertaining this has been actually a long-standing rumor that there was going to be some kind of crisis event. Back then, the old Warner Brothers regime was really embracing the multiverse, different stories. But ever since the merger happened, they're clearly concentrating on this more connected universe. And that's why so many things have changed as of the Flash movie, which is a movie beholden to that old regime. Batgirl canned, as we went over. The Solar Keaton movie canned, as we went over. So that connectivity and all kinds of things that they're doing there is a thing of the past, and so is this plan. It's just interesting to consider. Do you believe that Hamada really was going to bring back Henry Cavill? Because I know a lot of the fandom, especially a lot of the Snyder side of the fandom, really didn't like what the old regime was doing, felt like Hamada didn't want Superman back, but according to this source for the Hollywood Reporter, eventually he would have, and they were going to embrace a whole cluster feck of a mess of a story, and in a good way, I mean, with Crisis on Infinite Earth. So all I'm trying to point out there is that the old regime was embracing multiple different timelines and heroes and iterations of heroes and God knows what else more than ever before, and that's completely been flipped on its head because we're clearly not doing that outside of the Flash movie, which is getting into a bit of multiversal travel, obviously. But again, that is a picture from the old regime that they're still releasing, obviously, because as they've said before, apparently Andy Muschietti has directed a kick-ass Flash movie that is very, very fun. All of these other plans that you've heard of, now not happening. So the Flash movie will be like, hopefully a fun movie, but it won't have that original ripple effect that was meant to kind of advertise and showcase the next 3 to 5 years, because that next 3 to 5 years has kind of been abolished. And we're getting a new, well, 8 to 10 years now. All right, so up next, briefly, some more details on this cancelled Batman Beyond movie. So they go on to say that in the aftermath of the news of Wonder Woman 3 hitting the skids, several items have popped up here and here about how there was a plan to spin off a Batman Beyond movie from Flash, and that Christina Hodson, already in the old DC fold, thanks to writing Batgirl and Flash, was penning it. Here are a few more details. Hodson pitched her take, which had executives excited and had actually commenced writing on, obviously, this Batman Beyond movie, when, about 2 weeks after the hires of James Gunn and Peter Safran, she was told to stop. Some Bat fans' hearts may break when we tell them the project was looking to resuscitate a romance between a Michael Keaton Batman and Catwoman. Would Michelle Pfeiffer have returned? Who knows? I know some people, my take on this, are really heartbroken by the idea of how good would it have been to see Keaton's Batman still fight crime in his 70s and maybe bring on a younger iteration, a younger Batman. Obviously, this wouldn't have been an extremely accurate iteration of Batman Beyond, because no matter how or what we see in the Flash movie, I doubt their Gotham's going to be like Batman Beyond in the animated series. So I think it would have still been Batman Beyond in principle and in focus and everything. It's just would have been maybe Terry taking up the mantle, maybe a bit more technically advanced, but I don't think it would have been insanely futuristic. I just think they would have kept true to the theme of it. Bruce being in the Batcave, mentoring Terry going out there as the new Batman. But as to why James Gunn and Peter Safran have apparently got rid of this is because of what I've already aforementioned. Long story short, the old regime's plans really splintered and rippled out into all these other things. Batgirl, Keaton solo movie, etc., etc. They have got a new plan that they don't want to adhere to that old plan. Whatever they've got planned for Batman, whatever they've got planned for God knows what else, Superman, Wonder Woman, all these other characters they are making right now. They have made, I'm sure, quite a bit of it because they're pitching to David Zaslav very soon this cinematic plan for DC Studios. But even if you love this idea of this Batman Beyond solo Keaton movie or whatever, or hate it, I'm just saying I don't blame James Gunn and Peter Safran personally if their vision when they came in was like, oh, you're already doing like Keaton staying on. And he was going to have that doesn't really fit in with the Batman or Batman story and larger DC story we were going to have. So as a result, we are kind of got to put that project to rest, which I think will make people happy if they wanted a younger Batman. Again, this is hypothetically assuming that they don't connect Matt Reeves' Robert Pattinson Batman to the mainline DC universe. I personally, for now, don't think that's going to happen. But again, hypothetically, they don't do that. If they didn't, if they kept Keaton beyond the Flash movie as was originally planned, for crying out loud, Batgirl, now this cancelled solo movie, then our Batman would have been a 70s Batman. Even if you love the idea of a Batman Beyond storyline going on, clearly James Gunn and Peter Safran didn't want a Keaton-aged Batman. And even if that story is good in so many ways, it's not their vision, and they're probably going to try and ignite, you know, what the DC universe should have really have flourished to in the Snyderverse, like a collective team and all, you know, a coherent cinematic universe, kind of like what Marvel has achieved in their first 10 plus years. That is what the DC universe under James Gunn and Peter Safran's watch is trying to achieve. And clearly this Batman Beyond movie with Keaton rippling out from the Flash wasn't in the cards. So as for James Gunn Twitter updates, this almost seems like a segment in of itself. I need some like music, somebody make that so we can just play it every time we have some Twitter updates, because James Gunn, if you didn't know already and you're not on Twitter, is very active, very quick to shut people down, very quick to kind of reply to people and engage a little bit. So given that a lot of people have been asking anyway about the DC universe, but especially after the Hollywood Reporter story and then Deadline, one fan said, "Hey James, please tell us if we're gonna see a Superman. We've been starved of the greatest comic book character on the big screen for ages." And he replied, "Yes, of course." So he's saying, yes, of course, in my DC universe, you are going to see Superman. Superman is a huge priority, if not the biggest priority. So we don't know exactly what that means other than in the DC universe that Peter Safran and James Gunn are cooking up right now. All these movies they're plotting out with a connected thread of story, likened to that of the MCU. You know, start with Iron Man, it led all the way up to Endgame, all of this stuff, a coherent story. They're doing that, and apparently Superman is a huge priority of that, if not the biggest priority in their plans for the new DC universe. Now, will that be Cavill? We don't know. He didn't say anything about that. But regardless, the character is one of the biggest priorities. Is this a surprise? No. David Zaslav said he wants to go ham on the Trinity. He wants Wonder Woman, Batman, and Superman to be huge cash cows for them. And obviously that makes sense. And as James Gunn is reaffirming here from what has always been said from the new leadership at WBD, Superman is a huge priority, if not the biggest. I think if we even try and link this back to the whole Henry Cavill story of earlier, they're still just trying to figure out how Superman is involved in their story. And maybe they're still making decisions if that Superman should be Henry Cavill. Now, the next story I want to talk about briefly, because I don't really want to get into like the whole drama side of things, but I do have something to say about this, and that is when we had, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen this anyway, and this is very much so linked with James Gunn. We're still following that thread of news. We had the Den of Nerds tweet out from one of his sources that James Gunn does not like Henry Cavill. Like, it was a statement. It wasn't like, you know, I've heard, I don't know if this is true, that James Gunn, I've heard from one of my sources that maybe it wasn't like that. He just said that James Gunn does not like Henry Cavill. I think in of itself, just to kind of make my thoughts known, that's one of my issues with influencers, and no disrespect here to Den of Nerds. He even said himself that he could have handled it better. It's just, you know, on the larger narrative, because there's other big influencers like Grace Randolph, who's been shut down in the past. Sometimes things are put out in tweets, and influencers have absolutely huge followings, like double, triple, quadruple, 10 times my size, and that is hundreds of thousands of subscribers and followers. And when you put out scoops that you don't know for an absolute certainty if is true, as a fact, like a statement, then you're still gonna have, even if a small percentage, that's still tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of your followers being like, okay, this is happening. Do you know what I mean? And that's my biggest pet peeve about putting out scoops. So when Den of Nerds put that out, somebody replied to Den of Nerds' tweet, tagging James Gunn, saying, care to debunk this one? And James Gunn does. He replies, sure, false. And it was just clean like that, right? It was shutting it down, which I think James Gunn had every right to do. You don't have to believe James Gunn. You don't have to believe Den of Nerds. You decide, right? But then the Den of Nerds dug a little bit deeper by saying, even more people have reached out to me since you said this to tell me you really don't like him. Just saying what I heard. But with Josh's reply there, that's when James Gunn then hammered down, and he has a zero tolerance for people on the internet with scoops claiming to be true that aren't necessarily true. Or I guess, you know, you could have the theory that James Gunn is just shutting this down no matter what because he doesn't want it out there. But again, you have to decide what you think there. So weird. You seem so plugged in. Anyway, I just had 40 people reach out to me to say you just got kicked out of your mum's basement. So sorry, man. And that is pretty hilarious, just because, yeah, I think the fact that he said, sure, this is false. Then the Den of Nerds replied back saying, well, you know, I've just had even more people reach out to me now saying you don't like Henry Cavill. Well, I think he was just like, right, look, dude, I've already told you this isn't true. You're still insisting on it. And this is where I think, for me, I just wasn't a fan of this. I've already told you that if you're a YouTuber or an influencer of any kind, you have scoops. I don't think people should put things out there like facts. Now, the Den of Nerds didn't say, or like add to his sentence, I have heard this, I don't know if it's true, I tend to believe this source, he's been credible before, they've been credible, but this is what I've heard. So that's the first criticism I have. But then, you know, I felt like he just kept digging a hole on Twitter after that. So even though when you have other fans saying that, if the head of DC Studios or the joint head is saying no, Josh just kept replying saying, I like James, but he's lying. Pretty simple. Like, so he's flat out calling James Gunn a liar there, hammering down even more, saying, you know what lying is, right? And I just find that a bit, yeah, like, this is the thing. I get that you have scoops, or other people do. I've had them in the past before, but when I hear things, I don't always put it out online, because unless I have, like, absolute truth, even if they have, a track record, even if I did put it out there, I would word it in such a way that didn't make it come across like this is facts, like 100%. Because even before, like, the Den of Nerds has put out tweets saying David Zaslav doesn't like Matt Reeves' Batman or Robert Pattinson. And then after that, Matt Reeves got a first look deal at Warner Brothers Discovery. They're penning the sequel to The Batman 2. There's a Penguin spinoff. He's even gone on to say after that that Matt Reeves, Pattinson's Batman and the Penguin, is a killer combo. So do you see what I mean? All I'm trying to say is, when you put stuff out there, you don't always know that you're right. It couldn't get more simple as that. Now, yes, I am totally aware that influencers or just uniquely and exclusively scoopers put stuff out there anyway, right? That's not my issue. My issue is the wording. So you get my drift. And I do think that the reply to James Gunn could have been a bit different and just handled a little bit better. But as I said, Josh did acknowledge that instead of doubling down, then tripling down that James is lying and everything like that, he could have replied like, okay, well, this is what I've heard, man, but like, I hope you're right. I really would maybe like to see Henry Cavill back again as Superman. It's just interesting that I heard that, and if that could have anything to do with the fact that the Man of Steel 2 movie pitches and talks have been promptly ended. That would be a more understandable response rather than just calling James Gunn lying. It's pretty simple. You know what lying is, right? And everything like that. I don't know, guys. Let me know your thoughts on that whole situation. If you're on Twitter, if you saw it, what do you think of scoopers and how they put things out there? How do you think they should handle it when they do put things out there? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Let me know any and all thoughts down in the comments. But let's get on to our last story today, one that I'm very excited for. One that is kind of brief, but again, this kind of kicks off the whole production side of coverage on this channel, and that is Joker 2. But Todd Phillips has released the first image of Arthur Fleck in Arkham, obviously, and I've got a bit to say about this, believe it or not. So this is very interesting. I'm very excited, and we'll get onto the whole musical aspect of it again, so I just feel compelled to talk about it, because so many people are like, oh, it's got to be shit because it's a musical. First, we see Arthur Fleck getting shaved. Now, why is he getting shaved? Obviously, you wouldn't trust an Arkham inmate like Arthur Fleck, the Joker, who killed the psychologist at the end of the first movie with a razor blade. So he's getting the shaving done for him. Now, what's also interesting is that he has these marks on his arm. Now, I did a live stream last night, and I pitched my theory. Some people were thinking that these were spots, and I can't actually disprove otherwise. I genuinely can't. But we know that Arthur Fleck smokes a lot, right? Smokes a lot of cigarettes. Now, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, for example, remember the scene in The Joker when it's actually really cool that they did this. They show Arthur in a straitjacket just like hammering his head against his cell door, and we don't see Arkham clean like that until the very end of the movie. Clearly there, like, he was just banging his head on the wall, kind of like harming himself. So I don't think it's a stretch from the imagination to believe that Joker would put cigarettes out on himself, and that's what those are. Some are healed more than others, some aren't. It's also just fascinating seeing how much weight Joaquin Phoenix has lost again in, I don't think, a very long amount of time. We did hear that he did it in the very non-traditional way for the first movie. Usually actors have a proper, like, approach with a doctor on how to slim down weight. But for the first movie, if my memory serves me correctly, Joaquin Phoenix did say I can't remember if it was because of a previous shoot or something like that, but ultimately there wasn't too much time left for him to prepare to do that. So he opted into just eating an apple a day and having a lot of water. Obviously, he might have had a bit more than that because Jesus, but that was one of the hardest things for him to mentally deal with when getting into the absolute bone skinny version of Arthur Fleck. Because think how hungry you'd be if more or less, with something else here and there, I'm sure, but for more or less you just had a shit ton of water and an apple a day. Like, that would be severe and would probably help you with getting into the mental headspace for playing somebody as crazy as the Joker. Now, in other news with Lady Gaga's involvement in the film, we've actually had Todd Phillips reply to somebody on Instagram saying, getting a lot of these messages in my DMs, and they asked a sneak peek at Gaga, please. And on here, sorry to say that Lady Gaga does not start with us until after the new year, so it's going to be a bit. So it's going to be a bit until we actually see a sneak peek at Lady Gaga, and that's something I wanted to talk about anyway. Todd Phillips doesn't like post all the time, even during Joker production, but he did put teasers out there. And we are most certainly going to get a look at Harleen Quinzel. And I can't wait for that. I think it's going to be something just pretty simple. You know, it's not like major spoilery, like this is just a simple image of Arthur Fleck in Arkham Asylum getting shaved, and there's maybe some little details on his arm that we can read into, like cigarette burns or something. So with Harley, or should I say Harleen, at the beginning point of the movie, we'll probably see Lady Gaga. I wouldn't be surprised if she's wearing glasses. It could be like a really cool artistic shot of Arthur sat across her from the table, or maybe that will come sometime after just getting an individual shot of Lady Gaga in the role of Harleen Quinzel. So do expect that over the next several months, of course, and we'll be covering it here on the channel. And believe it or not, again, trying to take my bias away here, I'm still very excited for this movie. Yes, even with it being a musical, and trust me, I'm not a musical guy. I'm really not. I don't dislike them. I'm just not the type to be dying to see a musical. But I think people get the wrong idea when they think musical. They think it's going to be a Disney burst into song like Aladdin, I can show you the world, just something like that every 2 minutes. Because what I want to highlight again from Variety a while ago, an insider stressed that the film is more in line with A Star is Born versus that of In the Heights. So that's exactly what I'm saying. Even though Joker 2 is being labeled a musical, if you've seen A Star is Born, it's got plenty of dramatic scenes. It's not like a song every 2 minutes. There is a whole soundtrack that you can listen to on Spotify or wherever, but there's still a shite ton, just like Joaquin Phoenix's Walk the Line, of dialogue, usual acting, and not so theatrical performance with a musical number. So think A Star is Born, where you had Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga and that. There's plenty of in-between scenes, lots of drama going on, lots of story and narrative, and then every now and again they would fit a song in that was relevant to the way that was happening. Whereas obviously with this movie, they will probably fit it in with the whole delusional kind of Stockholm syndrome-y mental health perspective, something like that. But don't think that Joker 2 isn't going to have very similar scenes to Joker 1, where you actually follow the character, you have a whole scene of dialogue and everything like that all the way throughout the movie. It's just they're going to interestingly incorporate musical numbers in there to two very theatrical characters, the Joker himself and Harley Quinn. So I think that fits. And I think a lot of people are going to maybe change their tune once we see a bit more about this movie, and by the time especially we get a trailer. Anyway though guys, let me know your thoughts on the Joker 2 image and everything we've talked about today so far. Can't wait to read your comments. Love getting your insight on this news as well. Each and every time we do an update video, go ahead and like this video if you enjoyed it. It really helps support me and the channel. The last video performed very well, so thank you so much for your support on that. Going to be doing plenty more of these. All that's left to say is I'm going to leave the floor open to you guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see all of you people of the DC universe in the next video. Goodbye.